It's day 3 of our dig in Windfarthing, where we're asking why a 7th century Anglo-Saxon lady was buried here with the highest quality gold and garnet jewellery.
It's exquisite.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've discovered what appears to be a cemetery nearby, and we're hoping that 2 of the burials have some grave goods.
That sounds to me, Romy, like you're going to have a really interesting day tomorrow.
I can't wait.
We finished yesterday evening with that discovery of that burial site and raised lots of questions about why those people were buried in this landscape. And we're going to hope to find some answers in this adjacent field where we found something which we think could be truly extraordinary.
It's a beautiful morning, and Matt's still hoping to find the old excavation of the Windfarthing woman and signs of a ring ditch around the mound that might have marked her grave. Jackie and the team in Trench 2 are working through the tough soil to locate the source of the signals that the metal detector picked up last night.
It's really like digging concrete.
The key to understanding why the Anglo-Saxons chose this site to bury such an important woman might lie near the spring in the field next door.
Good morning.
Hi, Gus.
So the team are putting in one more trench.
Another field, another day.
Absolutely. Well, we're here because we're trying to understand why the cemetery was put where it was, and also what would have been visible to people at the time of the Windfarthing lady's funeral. What would the atmosphere have been like? And we're specifically here because metal detecting in the past has shown that there's a concentration of finds around here. So John's put some geophysics in.
It was quite nice. We've got clear ditches and what appear to be large post sockets, and a complex of anomalies. And there's lots of possible interpretations for what we've got. We think there's a lot of Roman material here, so it could be something like a Roman bathhouse, because we're close to water source just over the hedge there.
And Philippa also raised another possibility, that the finds could indicate some kind of votive offerings. It's quite a tenuous possibility because they're also the kinds of personal items that might come off when you're putting your clothes on and taking them off for a bath, like bracelets and finger rings and so on. But it's something that we ought to bear in mind. It could also be that these 2 activities are using the same spring, you know, having a bath and making a votive offering, both use water.
The fact we appear to have these sort of anomalies,
These, what, apses?
apses,
Yes.
then you can have those on bathhouses.
You can have those on shrines, you can have those on churches. I mean, how far do we want to push this? But the odd thing is there's 2 of them and there's that square end. It doesn't make a coherent building as yet.
So is this one deeply complex building, or is it multiple phases of building?
I think there could be 2 phases. We don't know which is earlier, so that's why we need to dig it.
But I think what's so important about this is that people seem to think that the Romans have in some way left and the Anglo-Saxons have in some way arrived as a new people into a completely clear landscape. And of course, that's absolutely ridiculous. There were people here all the time, and these structures were gradually crumbling and decaying and being reused and being changed, and we've got 5th century Anglo-Saxon items from this field, so it's a continuum. And to understand why Anglo-Saxons are using this, we have to understand the landscape immediately before. It's not a different thing, it's part of the same story.
So the new trench goes in looking for evidence of a bathhouse, a shrine, or something else entirely. And straight away, there are signs of buildings and traces of burning.
What you got, Hilda?
Well, there's quite a lot of this stuff coming up. Do you think that could be plaster?
Could be plaster or baked clay.
Baked clay,
There's a lot of burning
yeah.
here, isn't there?
Yeah, there's loads of charcoal. There's quite a lot of CBM.
It's certainly structural or elements of structure, isn't there?
Yeah, kind of demolition,
Collapse, yeah.
demolition collapse stuff.
Oh, it's going to be good. No pressure. Oh, that charcoal line's really intriguing. Yeah.
Yeah, look, there's proper grain here.
Oh.
Ah,
Oh, that's lovely.
tracing all the way along the edge of this feature.
Oh. Nice.
Over in the cemetery in Trench 2, Jackie's been working on one of the burials where we detected a promising metal signal.
I mean, if you look here, I've just now uncovered there's a knife here. And I've got bone down here.
Oh, yeah.
But you can see how difficult it is to see the edges.
It's really difficult, especially with the bright sun on it as well.
Yeah, the sun's not really helping us, but this stuff over the top is absolutely rock solid.
Crikey.
So I think it would be helpful if we can get you to wet sieve that, because that'll break it up a little bit more, just to make sure that we're not missing anything.
Absolutely.
The knife is a great find, and we don't want to miss any other grave goods which could help to tell us about the people buried in this cemetery. Over the last 2 days, our test pits in the village of Winfarthing have revealed evidence of late Anglo-Saxon occupation, as well as some intriguing finds.
We put it in here because they were afraid that the gold would come off. How about that?
So quite often you get S-shaped buckles that you put on your belt.
Yeah.
But this has got quite a lot of detail on it. So
Yeah, it looks like it's got little feathers or something on there.
yeah, I would like
leaves
to.
or something.
I don't think it's terribly old at the moment.
Okay.
Purely because actually there's so much of it still. It's still, you know, the copper alloys. It's not falling apart or anything. It's still quite solid. Brilliant stuff.
Yeah, it was just sort of sticking out of the ground, like straight out. It's a good thing we didn't smoosh it with the shovel.
Well, this is.
It's a lovely find, if a little later than the Anglo-Saxon pottery we found nearby, which is beginning to turn up in more gardens as we expand our survey away from the church.
Well, we're doing our best, Carenza. We've got 5 hairy guys here, as you can say. They're strapping lads, and they've been working really hard, although most of them are new to this kind of thing.
And you're here, so you're the only ones that are at the other side of this road. So what have you got coming out of it?
Well, we're not getting a lot out of this context layer, to be honest, but I think most of it's geology, I think. But we think that's possibly Thetford ware.
Yeah, no, that looks very much like it, doesn't it? Now, and you say it's not much, but even just having one bit like that, and it's quite a big bit as well, and the breaks at the edges are quite sharp, so it's unlikely to have moved around very much.
This adds to the evidence that the Anglo-Saxons were here 200 years or so after the burial of Our Lady and the cemetery on the hill, where Romy's revealing what appears to be another knife which could help to date the burials.
Do you want to pick a little bit more of it so we can get an idea of what that is? There might be another knife.
Do you want the probe over to see if it's...
I've got that, so it's not going to go anywhere.
See a grave with it.
No, we're okay. I think it just caught that edge of it, so... Yeah, it's not curving at the end, is it?
But this one here is...
No.
I think that's just staining.
That's just staining, yeah. Excellent stuff.
It's painstaking work. And Martin Carver, director of the Sutton Hoo Research Project, has joined the team for the day to lend a hand.
So could you give me a sense of what we're looking at here?
I am trying to conjure a grave out of this unpromising piece of earth here, because it's got a blotchy side here to it, and it's the edges aren't clear, but it's possible that that will turn out to be a grave.
And are they all in the same orientation?
Interestingly not. Interestingly not. So that's diagonal. This is, I don't know what this is, but this one is definitely east-west here.
Is that different periods?
I think so, yes. I think the most likely explanation is that there'd be a cemetery here where people buried in this orientation, and then the east-west are sort of more likely to come later, because we're dealing with the early Middle Ages, and in the 7th century they like to be east-west. So I think that's, bearing in mind the finds that have already come out of here, rich finds, beautiful rich finds of the 7th century, I think that sounds as though it might be an explanation, but it's pretty early days, and whether there's enough left here to put the story together, that's the big problem, I think. It's a huge challenge.
It's a race against time to find out what we can before the burials disappear. But the orientation of the graves suggests the cemetery was in use for centuries. And this tallies with the finds that Tom has discovered.
We start in the 5th century here, and they range from something that's reasonably complete, like that, and you can see that this is a long brooch where the pin would have come down and been clipped into there, and it's lost its two side knobs. These things normally break up, so that all you find are the knobs.
And we've got lots of knobs and blobs, haven't we?
Yep.
Can you tell how many burials these might represent then?
Well, it's tricky to say, but you can get them down to a kind of irreducible minimum, because people don't tend to have more, women don't tend to have more than 2 brooches per grave. So I've put pairs of brooches together. You know, these two could possibly have come from the same brooch. So looking at that principle, we've got 6 graves from this group which have a kind of coherence. So you could call this is early Anglo-Saxon. It might be easier to call it migration.
Yeah, I was going to say that migration period, when we think there's a lot of movement happening in Britain.
And then moving around, we have this kind of big disjuncture here, the gap between the migration period and the conversion period, and this is all represented by this one brooch.
So this is only one brooch here that
yes,
we've got?
Shattered into 4 bits. That is a disc brooch, a flat silver gilded disc brooch, which is entirely different in style. After this big break, I tend to call that the conversion period, because that's the big thing that's happening, the big political event. We've got Christianity, kings, and so on. And the material culture is very different. We have something like these very small, simple buckles. It's a very simple style of dress, and you'll notice that there are no brooches in here. There should be a few pendants, but they are at Norwich Castle Museum who have acquired them. So we're missing our pendants. What we have, the bronze bowls that are being put in graves later on. So we've got an escutcheon from a hanging bowl. So that would have held a ring onto a hanging bowl so that the bronze bowl could be suspended.
And in the migration period, all these brooches were associated with women, weren't they?
Yes.
But here we seem to have some objects that might be more male?
Well, maybe. There's nothing to stop a hanging bowl being buried with a man, but they're buried with women too. The single item that represents a man on this table, there's just one. And it's this little sword pommel.
Not very impressive, is it?
Well, it would have been. You know, it would have been from the top of a sword grip, so we'd have a nice big sword blade.
I can imagine that now.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, and it's just a tiny little bit, like they all are, all of these tiny little bits that represent just plough-smashed
fragments.
Fragments, exactly, of an enormous material culture, until we come to this point, which is the end of the grave good habit. And we've just got that single dress pin from the 8th or 9th century.
It's because by this time they're all Christian, aren't they? And they're not burying objects in their graves.
No, and you've put that quite well, because they are Christians and they are not burying with grave goods. The two things are not necessarily related.
The finds Tom discovered with his metal detector could have been moved across the field by the plough, so we don't know which burials they came from. But finds that are still where they were placed in their graves should give us more information about the individuals.
Can you talk me through it? What are we actually looking at?
Right, OK, well, you can see I have got the outline of the grave cut here, and it's starting to show up over there. I've got a femur coming down here. I think that's a bit of tibia down there, and there we've got a small knife. Wow. That's the sort of tang end of it, so that's the blade, that's the back of it, and that's the tang end that would have been the handle.
So that knife would have been buried, perhaps attached to the hip of whoever this was?
Yeah, I mean, they'd probably have had a belt that the knife would be hanging from, in some kind of sheath. We have got in situ remains, we have got artefacts with them, and that will enable us to do a little bit of dating for it as well. Although knives are fairly ubiquitous throughout the Anglo-Saxon period, they were a sort of general purpose artefact that everybody would carry their knife. Whether you were male or female, you would have a knife.
And Romy, do you mind if I step into the...
You're right, just there, yeah.
Just here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
It's all right.
What are we looking at?
So we've got our grave cut coming up and round here. This finds bags just hiding and looking after some bone that we've got coming up, but really interesting is we've got another knife in here, if you can see that there.
How wonderful.
And we've also got a piece of copper alloy here as well, with the kind of bluey green tinge to it.
Is that a pin or is that a piece of decoration?
So it's definitely a piece of copper wire. We're not sure entirely what it is yet. It's a bit too small to be a clothespin, but we'll just have to find out.
The knives were carefully cleaned after the dig, and traces of horn handles and leather from a sheath were discovered. Bear's reconstructions can go into my virtual museum alongside the buckle and the sword pommel, which Helen thinks could all have come from the same male grave. He would have died a few decades before the Windfarthing woman was buried here, with her beautiful grave goods.
Is that going to show up against the black background?
You'd be surprised. Are these laid out in time order?
Yes, yes.
As well as the virtual museum, we're creating a timeline to help to navigate through the story. Because the finds have a range from early medieval back to Romano-British.
Well, we'll enter it and then we'll pop the date in. So.
Anglo-Saxon cemeteries are often found near sites that were venerated by the Romans. So a building like a shrine in our new trench would make complete sense.
Whoa! Big old.
That's a big place.
That's a pad stone or something, isn't it? Okay, we'll go back.
There it was.
Some more flue tile. Yeah. And burnt flue tile.
Yeah, it's burnt as well.
It's burnt.
I like the Romans, they left so much stuff.
Dan is keen to get Helen's take on the S-shaped buckle from the test pits.
These are really interesting little things, aren't they? Because you're probably not old enough, but I had a snake belt in the early 1970s, and they had exactly this kind of thing. But these are birds rather than snake. What do we normally date these to? 17th century going into the 18th. I mean, they've got that continuity right up to the 1970s snake belts. I don't think they ever go out of use because they're so practical.
That's not bad. I think our test pit volunteers will be happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really nice thing to find because you can immediately understand what it was used for. Yeah. Lovely.
Brilliant.
Back in the Roman trench, there's a first hint of a possible wall emerging.
Looks like you got another stone there. Come out, Hilda.
Yeah, do you think these could be in situ?
Yeah, I think so. It would make sense with John's geophysics that there should be some sort of, high magnetic anomalies, or whether that's a wall or something attached to a structure. So that obviously came up while we were stripping. We've been a bit more careful in this area. We're starting to get a number of large flints. Potentially reveal a feature here.
Yeah.
It's looking a bit wall-like, isn't it?
Yeah, wall foundation-y.
Foundation would be interesting.
This wall tallies with a feature in the geophys. But is there anything to suggest it's a wall of a shrine? It's difficult to tell from the ceramic finds coming out of the trench.
We have pieces of hypercoarse tile, box flue tile, with the combed keying so that the plaster sticks firmly to the surface and can then be painted and decorated. We have the tegula. So you'd have another flange along here, and then the semicircular imbrex goes over the top to provide a waterproof joint.
Yeah.
The remains of dinner,
The last meal?
oyster shells. They've come a good distance in from the coast, haven't they?
So we are looking at a solid building.
Yes, definitely.
Flint walls, foundations, and that's what we're seeing here.
Yes.
The rubbed out walls. I really want to see one of these large pits. Have we started to see these pits yet?
There might be something just coming up over there. It's looking a bit darker, but I'm not sure they're down far enough quite yet.
I really want to see what these are, whether they are big post pit supports or whether they're actually pits, rubbish pits. Well, there wouldn't be rubbish pits, would they?
Well, they might.
Well, I suppose they might if they're totally different phase.
This building is a puzzle. It's not the right shape for a villa or a farmstead, but we've found hypercoarse, domestic pottery, and potential votive offerings such as coins and jewellery. So what's going on here? As ever, Stuart has a theory.
Yeah, there's a very good parallel, I think, for this, although it's on a much larger scale. It's at Groundwell Ridge in Swindon. Yeah. It's a spa site, it's not a villa, and it evolves over a long period of time, but people come there to bathe, to take the waters for its healing properties and its magic properties as well.
So would that account for all of the breadth of artefacts we've been finding in that field? Because the detectorists have been finding all sorts of stuff, haven't they?
people that are coming here, and it's not just coming here to worship or to bathe. Perhaps they have to be fed and they have to be watered and looked after for a few days. So they'll be dropping things, there'll be lots of other artefacts which are not quite domestic, but give a hint that people are spending a bit of time here, but not very long probably. So I think we've got a really, really complex and interesting site. In Grandwell Ridge, for instance, it's termed a pilgrim sanctuary, even in its scheduling. So these are important places in the landscape.
So the Windfarthing Pilgrim Sanctuary. I like that. I can't say it, but I like it.
And this ties in with the field name that Stuart spotted on day 2. And perhaps this helps to explain why the site was of such significance that centuries later it became the central meeting place for the Anglo-Saxons and the burial site for the Windfarthing woman. Derek's been analysing his XRF results from her grave goods and he's noticed some oddities.
Yes. This one. And the gold itself was pretty typical for Anglo-Saxon gold, around 60 to 70%, alloyed with silver. But there was an area down here that was really high in iron, which is peculiar because there's obviously no iron there.
Yeah, well, that is interesting because it is, if you go back to the original picture, looking at my excavation photograph of it, I mean, this is as it's coming out of the ground, we've always noticed that it's got this irony colour over the top of it. But
I mean, is this a pin?
Well, yes. Now, looking at it now, it feels slightly embarrassing that we can see it on the photo, but we didn't notice it while we were excavating. That is quite an odd thing to have a pin overlying a pendant.
I was thinking about that, and we always look at grave goods like this, and we imagine them being kind of telling the story of this person in the grave. But could this have been for her? This was linked to her, and it wasn't for everyone else. It was for her.
Yes, well, there's a kind of ambivalent relationship with grave goods in the 7th century because it's a time when grave goods are becoming, in a way, almost less fashionable. Some people have loads, some people have absolutely none, and some people have them, but they're in a coffin, enclosed. And I haven't seen anything that suggests a cloak wrapping them up, but that would enable you to have your cake and eat it. And so maybe you're right, maybe this was concealed, or maybe she had her full dress on, and then at the point of burial, it was closed up.
Yeah, maybe. But we know these kind of artefacts have biographies, don't they? We can see that in some of the repairs. And if we look at this one in particular, it's one of my favourite pieces, this one, because it's so beautiful. This was one of our richest pieces in terms of gold content. It's sort of around the 80 to 90% mark. But on the back here, as you can see, this small repair is a much less pure gold, so it's been repaired and refreshed. We shouldn't underestimate the skill of the Anglo-Saxon goldsmith in these as well, because I was looking at some comparative data, and the Staffordshire hoard, for example, there's evidence that the smiths were actually enriching the surface to make the poorer quality gold look like better gold.
Essentially, they kind of try to corrode and leach out the copper and the silver by using kind of acids and salt. And...
So actual chemistry to make these things look more gold, to kind of bluff them in a way, to bring out the gold, which is incredible.
I do think that pendant has a curiously pitted surface, not just on the scan, but in reality. So maybe that had been treated in that way.
No, the last thing we did, which I know is perhaps getting more interesting as we've studied it more, is the bowl.
The main thing I want to know about that bowl is where was it made? Because if it's a brass, there's the argument that it was made in the Byzantine world, in the Mediterranean, and it's been brought here. If it's not, well, I'm expecting it to be brass.
Okay.
Is it brass?
No.
Oh.
No. It is a classic tin bronze.
Oh. Right.
So where does that put it? Does that make it more local?
Well, that makes it kind of more interesting, because this is a very difficult bowl to parallel. The only parallel I've found has been another hitherto very odd bowl from Broomfield in Essex. And so maybe this means that there's some kind of East Anglian workshop making these. It just shows how very unusual this grave is, as if we needed any more.
It's pulling things in from all over, isn't it?
The contents of this extraordinary bowl might reveal even more about Our Lady.
As I started going through this, I started finding all this brown material.
The organic material is surprisingly well preserved amongst the fragments of the bronze.
It's unusually thin, isn't it? And it reminds me more of the kind of very fine copper alloy bodies of the hanging bowls, like the ones from Sutton Hoo, for example.
Right, yeah.
And the copper in there would also help preserve the organic stuff, which might explain how you've got that preservation in that spot inside a copper alloy structure like that. The Royal Lyre of Sutton Hoo had fallen into a copper alloy bowl, and then the hanging bowl had fallen onto the top of them, so the top of the lyre was actually squashed between two copper alloy surfaces, and that's why you've got 2/3 of it preserved and the rest sticking out in the acid sands completely disappeared.
See, this has completely blown my mind. So the next stage, I guess, is to try and get an identification of exactly what species this is, if it's possible. Because that would be really interesting, because we might be able to tell something more about medicinal properties.
Yeah, and it would give us potentially tangible evidence of her status as perhaps some sort of healer, if you can see something medicinal.
Yeah.
For example, some of the bark reminded me a little bit of willow, which of course, I don't know when they discovered the healing properties of willow bark, but it's the basis to aspirin.
Right, of course.
So,
well, honestly, this has been one of the most amazing things that I've discovered in a long, long time.
The contents of this bowl would not have been accidental and might help us understand why the Windfarthing woman was so important. This was a time of epic poems depicting warrior kings like Beowulf and queens like Judith. It was a time when Our Lady would almost certainly have mixed with powerful women. Women who achieved legendary status like the Frankish queen, St. Baltild.
Balderhild, as she should be called in Old English, who starts off actually as an Anglo-Saxon lady. She's captured in war. She becomes a slave, probably a sex slave actually, marries the prince who falls in love with her, later becomes the queen, king mother of later kings of the Franks, and later, probably for political reasons, she's bundled off to the nunnery. And it's there that we have preserved as one of the great relics of the monastery in which she lived, just west of Paris, a beautiful embroidered chemise, a little light white tunic, embroidered by her own hand with images showing the kind of beautiful pendant jewellery and necklaces that she would have worn during her time as a senior lady, a princess and queen. And these show perfectly a beautifully bejewelled cross with garnet inlays and smaller little pendants hanging from that made of the crystal garnets that we see here as well. And so it's absolutely wonderful to have this sort of contemporary image of how the jewellery would have looked in its full glory.
St. Balderhild's story gives us an understanding of just how precious this jewellery must have been to Our Lady. We're nearing the end of our time in Windfarthing exploring her story, but back in the village, the test pits have started to hit solid archaeology.
Aha, so we've got something really exciting in the bottom of the test pit here. Jeff, that's what, 70 centimetres?
Yes, around about that. Yeah, we've been hacking through this really heavy clay for ages, and then we suddenly appear to have come down onto what looks like a cobbled surface. Yeah.
Yep, no, I think you're absolutely right. It does to me as well. And as you say, might be picking up the other side of the pit. Maybe you've got a feature cutting through it, not entirely clear. Or perhaps you've got quite a lot of charcoal just in the central bit there. That could even be a post hole maybe going through it. But we're right on top of it. It looks like it's some sort of yard surface where someone's thrown down the load of cobbles just to create a surface to walk on. What sort of finds have you had from immediately on top of it?
We've had very little, but well, we've got it here, in fact, a couple of bits of bone, but I think we've got some possible Thetford ware.
Yep, I think you are probably right there. We need to get it washed to get that confirmed, but it looks very much like that Thetford ware, so that's 850 to 1100 AD. Could be pre-conquest, could be just post-Norman conquest. In terms of what to do about that, the issue here is that we were thinking we'd take this cobbled surface up, and then just as we were looking at this, we were called over here to this test pit, same garden nearby, and look at this. So in here, we've got, well, this again, it's completely different to what you had above, isn't it, Doug?
Yes, it was quite an unexciting pit, but the last half hour, we started to sort of see this delineation here.
I mean, this is amazing, really, because you've got all that chalk. You haven't had chalk like that in a dense layer at all further up. You can see it's not there in the section. You can see just where your feet are there. You can see where it's appearing in the section behind you. It looks like there's a lot of mortar in with it. It looks like the footings of a wall, perhaps even a stone flint built wall, something like that. What it feels like here is we've actually got a late Anglo-Saxon, possibly Saxo-Norman complex here, where we've got a building and we've got a yard and we're just adjacent to the church. And so Jem and I would have said in your garden, it looks like the hypothesis we'd want to test if we had more time was, is this an Anglo-Saxon hall that typically are very close to churches because the lords are getting their sort of authority from their connection with the church. You'd expect an enclosure around it. They have a wall, they have a gate, they have a tower with a bell and all that sort of thing. We know that from documents. And I think what you've got is that here. You've got another 6 weeks and don't mind the rest of your garden being opened up.
It's a great result for our test pit teams. And Paul has spotted something else.
There is, however, a joker in the back, which is test pit 5.
Ah, the other side of the stream.
The side of the street. The bottom 2 layers in test pit 5 have both produced late Saxon pottery and nothing later. Now, there's only one sherd in each layer, but if you look at it, it's a really nice sherd. It's big, it's fresh, it's way bigger than anything else we're getting in any of the other test pits.
And it's quite sharply broken. We were talking about that when it came out the pit. Yeah.
It's very fresh. I mean, now it looks like late Saxon activity, it really does. So it might be that test pit 5 is actually the site of the original late Saxon core of the village.
So our community dig has certainly produced the goods, and we now have real evidence that Winfarthing was a Saxon settlement, albeit at a later date than the burials a few fields away. Back in the Roman trench, we're into the late afternoon, and it's all hands on deck. We've identified the wall line on the geophys and a ditch, as well as some post bits.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. That looks like brown coming through, doesn't it?
And there are more shrine-like finds coming up.
Okay, I'll take a look and see if I can identify it. Let's see if I can get it out the bag.
Including some more coins to add to the collection.
Oh wow, this is really well preserved. I can identify this perfectly. That's the Emperor Theodosius I, and I'll just have a look at the reverse and see if I can narrow down the date. Okay, if you look really carefully, you can maybe see a person walking left. That's a Victory. Just. And you can see Victoria, maybe along that side,
yes,
with the Eye of Faith.
I can.
So that's a Victoria AVGGG reverse, and those are only minted in 3 places, Arles, Lyon and Trier, between 388 and 395.
Well, that's a nice tight one.
One of the latest coins from the site, I think. But basically the coins that are coming off the spoil here and from the top of the trench are all dating from the late 3rd to 4th century. So it fits in with the other metal detecting finds that Tom's had from this field already.
Very nicely, yes.
Although we've only scratched the surface of this intriguing building, the evidence is still pushing us toward the idea that this was a Roman shrine or sanctuary. The geophys suggests it was rebuilt several times, and we found evidence of flint foundations supporting a wooden structure with a heavy roof. Pits inside the building may have been for beams supporting the roof, and some could have been ovens preparing offerings for the gods. There's evidence it was heated, and the geophys suggests that there were gardens surrounding the buildings. And just before we pack up, there's the tiniest bit of hope that we might have found the grave of the Winfarthing woman, which Helen excavated in 2015.
You finally found it.
Well, I reckon, why isn't that it?
Well, it's the right size, it's the right shape. Now I can see it against natural. It does look very much like the backfill of our grave, because our grave's fill had none of this white flecky chalk in it, but the whole lot with the topsoil was piled back in as a mix. So I don't see why this isn't our grave.
Well, this is where the GPS point said it was. we're north of that ditch, which is where the plan said. This is what we got distracted from on the first day. So we're now saying at 5 o'clock on day 3, that's it.
I don't mind encountering this right at the end of day 3. I think it's a win that we've got it at all.
At least now, we can be pretty certain that we haven't missed any further evidence from the grave of the Windfarthing lady.
Gosh, Helen, what a few days. It's been an emotional roller coaster. And what do you think we've learned?
Well, what we've learned about the Windfarthing lady is so much. We've found out from her bones that she's had a long life and she's been wearing her jewellery throughout that long life. And we also know from the jewellery that she's conscious of Christianity and that she's hugely conscious of her power structures of the time. She's part of those power structures.
And Stuart, does that concur with the things that you've found in the landscape?
It does. It echoes it. She was buried in a very special place in a landscape setting that may have been venerated for generations before her from prehistory. It's all about the water and the springs that are present here.
And that sense of this being a special place, is that something that you found, Corinne?
Well, it's interesting. The test pits in the village have given us the next chapter in the story where on the stream further down there's perhaps some of the earlier settlement that might just have been the same period that she was alive in, but actually a couple of hundred years later somebody reorganises the landscape, the beliefs, the way that's expressed, and builds the church and their hall immediately adjacent to that, and perhaps memory of our Windfarthing lady is lost as the church is built and the community takes its next step through time.
Oh.
Yes, but what's really remarkable about this place, though, is the Windfarthing woman was the most important grave in this cemetery, so it was probably dug the deepest, and that's why it survived. All the other people in this cemetery, all the rest of her community, were buried in slightly shallower graves that we have found, but we've only found the very bottom of them. And modern agriculture has removed everything but her, virtually, it seems. And this is not just happening in Windfarthing, it's happening in village after village across the country, that we are wrecking our Anglo-Saxon cemeteries with modern agricultural practice. And we've got to think, do we want to do that, or shouldn't we value what we've got before it vanishes?
Thankfully, Tom discovered the burial of this important woman before her story disappeared. Naomi continued her investigations after the dig and managed to identify the contents of the strange bowl. Foxgloves, horsetail, blushing lanterns, bracken and apple or pear stems, plants with healing properties, creating an attractive display. They flower in early summer, revealing the season she was buried. The bark was from birch trees, also known for its medicinal properties. And incredibly, enough wood survived to suggest that she was buried in a coffin or a wood-lined grave. The ceremony would have involved poetry, music and feasting, as Our Lady's body was placed with treasured objects, displaying her status as a member of the ruling classes and maybe as a healer. And perhaps a cloth was drawn over her in the last moment, and her delicate features were hidden from view, set apart from the other burials in the landscape around her.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses and behind-the-scenes insights.